I want to talk about some thinking I've been doing about Genesis 1. And I have said frequently on the radio as people ask me, what do I think is going on there in Genesis 1? That it's a lot easier to say what did not happen than what actually did happen. And what did not happen was materialistic Darwinian evolution. And this is something I've opposed consistently. When I say Darwinian evolution, I mean the neo-Darwinian synthesis or macroevolution. However, zeroing in on exactly how we're to understand Genesis chapter 1 and 2 has been problematic. And basically, there are two sides to the issue. One is the young Earth creationists, and then there's the old Earth intelligent design crowd. And characteristically, each has tried to interpret the text in light of that paradigm. I think they're all doing making a good faith effort and doing good work trying to understand it in light of the additional scientific facts, if you will, as they understand them. So this isn't to put anybody down. I have the highest regard for people's efforts on both sides of the issue. But I've always felt that there was something else that was kind of missing here, and I've recently stumbled upon a treatment that got me thinking in a whole new way about Genesis chapter 1. By the way, everybody in play has a high view of Scripture too, inerrantists. So that's not the question. And everyone that I'm thinking about also are against Darwinian evolution, so that isn't the option either. The option is, how are we to understand what God means to communicate in Genesis 1? And I've just been reading a book by two authors that are from Dallas Theological Seminary. I can't remember their names, but the book is called In the Beginning We Misunderstood. I want to commend it to you just for your consideration. But it's got me thinking, because basically they are asking a foundational hermeneutical question. And that question is, how would the people the book was written to by the original writer have understood those writings? Well, that's a good question. That's the right place to start with any biblical question. So who is the original writer? Well, Moses was the original writer. That's the classic conservative understanding. If Moses was the original writer, then when did he write this? Well, this is the Pentateuch. It's the first of the 5 books. This is the first 5 books, and Genesis is the first of it, and Genesis is the book of beginnings. And so this must have been written after the Exodus and before conquering the land. Possibly during the time God was giving the law and before the wanderings. But what was it meant to do? Remember what was happening to the people to whom Moses was writing. They had been living for over 400 years in Egypt. They had very little connection theologically with their roots, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They had been slaves for all of this time, and now God sends a deliverer, Moses, and Moses delivers them by showing that he is the true God through the 10 plagues and the deliverance through the Red Sea. Now Moses is educating them about the true God and about beginnings by contrast with the Egyptian cosmologies that they have been raised with in that culture. Now, in Egyptian cosmologies, parts of creation were gods, Ra, the sun god, for example, and a whole host of others, and many of the plagues. All of the plagues were actually against Egyptian gods, to show that the God of Israel was bigger than their gods. So in this accounting that we see in Genesis, what do we see? We see an accounting of how everything began. We see an accounting of the beginning of the problem and a beginning of the solution, which entails something important of the nation of Israel. And so the beginning starts, in the beginning Yahweh created the heavens and the earth was formless and void. That means it wasn't habitable, and there was nothing living in it. And then the rest of the first chapter explains how God organizes the habitation and populates it with things. But notice how he does it. He creates the lights, which are for seasons and days and things like that. The lights he created. They're not gods. They don't even have names in the Hebrew cosmology. They are just functionaries, that's all. They are not deities. Then he creates the animals, then he creates Adam and Eve, and it's not clear at all that the first 4 or 5 days are solar days. The sun is created late. Certainly doesn't seem that the sixth or the seventh day seem to be 24 hours. The sixth day is too long and the seventh day is eternal. That's not the point of the passage. The point is more of a framework hypothesis showing that God is the one responsible for the order of the world, and all of these particulars are in sharp contrast to the Egyptian cosmology that the Jews had been raised with. Moses is saying this is how it really happened. God is God, and he depersonalizes nature in this account. And then following that, it's called the Toledoths, in the generation of, in the generation of, in the generation of. 8 or 9 times we see statements like that. And what this is meant to do is to give the Jews a sense of their own history, that not nature being God, but God being God over nature. He had just demonstrated in the plagues, and now Moses is describing how he made all these mere things for man's purpose. Man is the center of creation, but there's a problem. God then creates a rescue plan with Abraham and the nation of Israel. This nation now that is moving towards the promised land is an important part of it. This is the purpose of the book of Genesis. So in one sense, trying to squeeze Genesis 1 into either a young earth scenario scientifically or an old earth scenario scientifically is to miss the point, because it wasn't meant to give a scientific or maybe even a chronological day-by-day characterization, but to show who was responsible for the world and explaining the categories of creation, not necessarily the order of creation or the time it took for God to do it. Now there's something to chew on. I have a lot more thinking to do about this myself, but it adds some new details into the discussion that to me are fascinating and hold a lot of promise for resolving some of the conflict that there is between parties on what Genesis 1 actually means.